And a heated exchange unfolded during a U.S. congressional subcommittee hearing. And this as Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen questioned FBI Director Kash Patel over allegations published in a recent magazine report concerning his conduct and attendance in office. Well, the controversy stems from an article published by The Atlantic, which cited more than 24 anonymous sources claiming that Patel's alleged drinking habits and unexplained absences had raised concerns among officials within the FBI and the Department of Justice. Originally titled Kash Patel's erratic behavior would cost him his job, the report later appeared online under the headline, "The FBI Director is MIA." The report also noted that the White House, the Department of Justice and Patel himself, they strongly denied the allegations. According to the article, Patel responded through an FBI statement saying, "Print it, all false, I'll see you in court, bring your checkbook." Appearing before lawmakers, Patel, he firmly rejected the accusations, calling them unequivocally and categorically false. Listen to this.
Hello, friends. Jack speaking. Great to have you back. Kash Patel, now running the FBI, wrote a book appendix naming 60 former officials as enemies of the people. Those named are now hiring lawyers and beefing up security, fearing the agency is being weaponized against them. It's one of the most alarming stories of Trump's second term. Patel's enemies list is documented reality, not metaphor. 60 named officials now face a potential weaponized FBI. We'll break down what the list says, who's on it, Patel's hearing testimony, and why this matters for the integrity of American law enforcement. Now let us be honest about what the headline is claiming and what the documented reality is.
So there have been no occasions when your security detail had difficulty waking or locating you, is that right?
Nope, it's a total farce. I don't even know where you get this stuff, but it doesn't make it credible because you say so.
I'm not saying it, Director Patel. It's been written and documented.
You are literally saying it.
No, I'm saying that these are reports, Director Patel.
No,
and
unlike your baseless reports,
Director
the only person
Patel,
that was slinging margaritas in El Salvador on the taxpayer dollar with a convicted gangbanging rapist was you.
You know,
the only person that ran up a $7,000 bar tab in Washington, D.C. at the lobby bar was you.
Meanwhile, Patel has filed a defamation lawsuit against The Atlantic and reporter Sarah Fitzpatrick in a U.S. District Court in Washington, D.C. The complaint argues that while criticism of FBI leadership is permissible, the publication crossed legal boundaries by publishing what it described as fabricated allegations intended to damage Patel's reputation and force him out of office. The lawsuit is seeking $250 million in damages.
The headline says, Kash Patel reveals Trump kept a private list of people he planned to silence. That specific framing, a secret Trump-written list personally compiled, kept private, just now revealed, overstates what the documented record shows. What the record actually shows is something that does not need exaggeration to be alarming. Kash Patel himself wrote a book called Government Gangsters. He published it in 2023, and in the appendix of that book, he included a list of approximately 60 people, former FBI directors, former DOJ officials, former intelligence community leaders, career law enforcement professionals, and labeled them government gangsters and deep state operatives.
Man, oh man, there has been so much today, and I truly don't know where to start. So I'm just going to make sure that we start off with a few facts. So a couple of facts that we need to make clear for everyone is that, number one, Director Christopher Wray, when he was appointed to be the head of the FBI, was appointed by Donald Trump. Now, I will agree that I definitely take issue with a number of decisions that Donald Trump makes, especially when it comes to the people that he decides to appoint to very important positions, including this one, because I did have to make sure that I wasn't going crazy. But when I say that you are the least qualified FBI director in the history of the FBI, that is real, because you are the only one that never even served with the FBI prior to joining. Yet we are supposed to believe that you are the greatest thing since sliced bread. I didn't ask you a question. Now, what I want to go through is to talk about why you are a failure and why, honestly, we just need to tell you bye-bye. I know that you got a little upset.
He put their names in print in a book that he sold commercially that any American could buy and read. And then he was nominated to run the FBI. And then he was confirmed. And now, the man who put 60 people on a published enemies list is the director of the agency that has the power to investigate, surveil, and prosecute American citizens. That is the real story. And it does not need any embellishment to be one of the most significant and most alarming developments in American law enforcement in modern history. So let us understand who Kash Patel is and how he got here, because the trajectory matters. Patel was a House Intelligence Committee staffer who became one of Trump's most loyal defenders during the Russia investigation. He worked in the Trump administration in national security roles.
And you put on your show for your boss because it seems like you're trying to save your job when it came to talking to Senator Booker yesterday. But let's go through some of your failures. So before you were even confirmed, and I think one of my colleague from Georgia, pointed out that you were already targeting career officials so that you could direct illegal firings. Mind you, these cases that you were so upset about, which are the ones tied to Trump, the cases came through his handpicked FBI director. And frankly, when people sit around and say things like, oh, you know, we're happy because now we feel safe, I don't know who feels safe in this country except for the white supremacists, because I specifically as a black woman definitely don't feel safe. And frankly, my colleagues have been real nice to you today, and I applaud them, but I don't have the same demeanor because I know that multiple colleagues on this side of the aisle have faced death threats. In fact, somebody tried to kill one of my colleagues, and frankly, I don't know if this FBI
and developed a reputation as someone who was willing to use his positions to push Trump's preferred narratives about being targeted by a corrupt deep state. After Trump left office, Patel continued to be one of the most vocal voices in the MAGA ecosystem for the argument that federal law enforcement had been weaponized against Trump and his allies. He wrote Government Gangsters as both a political argument and what critics described as a hit list, a document that named the specific individuals he believed were responsible for what he characterized as the weaponization of the federal government against Trump. When Trump won in 2024 and Patel was nominated to run the FBI, the reaction from the people named in that book appendix was not theoretical concern.
Or under your leadership, if those people would have been caught. I don't have any confidence in you. And if we start talking about the reasons that I lack confidence, we could start with you not just wanting to acknowledge some simple facts. Simple facts like the vast majority of the threats are coming from right-wing extremism. And I know my colleagues have tried to stress this, but I decided that I would maybe do it in a different way. Number one, I have a couple of UCs. Kim Buck, one of multiple Republicans receiving death threats for voting against Jim Jordan as House Speaker.
Without objection.
Another one, Republican lawmaker says she received death threats after voting against Jim Jordan in Speaker's race.
Without objection.
In addition, there was another one from another colleague who now is leaving Congress because they said that they were calling his wife anonymously and threatening her life to the extent that she ended up sleeping with a firearm.
Without objection.
Okay, so here's the deal. How are we supposed to have confidence when you're sitting up here telling the Senate yesterday that it will take you 14 years before you can get the FBI fully staffed to do their jobs? You're also now redirecting resources so that they can go and play ICE agents on the streets.
It was immediate and practical fear. Lawyers got hired, security got upgraded, records got preserved. People who had spent their careers in federal law enforcement, people who had devoted decades to serving the country through Republican and Democratic administrations alike, started taking concrete steps to protect themselves from the possibility that the new FBI director was going to use the Bureau to go after the people he had publicly branded as his enemies. Now, let us talk about the confirmation hearing, because what happened when senators questioned Patel about the list tells you something important about how he approaches the accountability that comes with the kind of power he now holds. Senate Democrats went into that hearing with Patel's book in hand. They confronted him directly with the appendix. They asked him specifically and on the record whether that list of 60 people represented targets for FBI investigation or prosecution under his leadership. And Patel's response was to claim that critics were grossly mischaracterizing his words, that it was not an enemies list, that the people he had named in his book were being described inaccurately as targets. when all he had done was document what he believed were abuses of power. That framing, the insistence that naming 60 people in a book called Government Gangsters and labeling them deep state operatives was not the creation of an enemies list, did not satisfy the senators asking the questions, and it should not satisfy anyone watching who takes the plain meaning of words seriously. If you write a book, publish it commercially, name 60 people in the appendix, label them government gangsters, and then get confirmed to run the FBI, the burden is on you to explain why the people on that list should not worry about what your leadership of the FBI might mean for them. Patel's confirmation hearing did not provide that explanation, and the people named in his appendix responded accordingly by taking protective measures rather than waiting to find out. Now, let us talk about what the Senate Judiciary Committee has actually documented about the concerns surrounding Patel's confirmation and his approach to leading the FBI. Because the concerns are not just from political opponents making arguments. They are documented in committee materials and oversight documents that reflect the testimony and the evidence that senators reviewed during the confirmation process. The Senate Judiciary Democrats produced a fact sheet specifically addressing Patel's enemies list. It documented the 60 people named in his book appendix. It quoted from his public statements about targeting deep state actors. It cited concerns from people who had served in national security roles under both Republican and Democratic presidents about what Patel's confirmation would mean for the independence of the FBI. And it specifically warned that Patel was likely to weaponize the FBI to target enemies of Trump, using the Bureau not as an institution of neutral law enforcement, but as a tool of political retaliation against people who had crossed or opposed Trump during his first term and in the intervening years. That warning is not a fringe concern. It is a documented concern raised by senators with access to classified briefings, to testimony from former officials, and to the oversight materials that their committees are responsible for reviewing. And the fact that those concerns were raised, documented, and published in committee materials before Patel was confirmed is itself significant. It means that the concerns about how he would run the FBI were known, articulated, and entered into the record before he ever took the director's chair. Now, let us talk about the people who are named on Patel's list and what they are actually doing in response, because the human dimension of the story is important, and it tends to get lost in the political back and forth about enemies lists and weaponization of the FBI. CNN and other outlets have reported in detail on how people named in Patel's book appendix are responding to his confirmation and his assumption of the FBI director role. And the responses are not abstract political statements. They are concrete, practical steps taken by real people who are genuinely afraid. People who spent decades in federal law enforcement, who ran the FBI, who led DOJ divisions, who oversaw national security investigations, are hiring personal attorneys. Not because they have done something wrong, but because they want legal representation available if they become the subject of an investigation driven by political motivation rather than genuine law enforcement calls. They are upgrading their personal security. Because when the director of the FBI has put your name in a published book, labeling you a government gangster, the concern is not just legal, it is also physical. They are preserving records, documenting their past work, their decisions, their rationale, because they anticipate the possibility that their past conduct will be scrutinized not by independent investigators following the evidence, but by a politically directed apparatus looking for anything that can be used against them. These are not paranoid people. These are experienced professionals who understand better than almost anyone what the FBI is capable of doing when it is directed at a target. And they are taking those capabilities seriously, precisely because they know how they work from the inside. Let us also talk about what former Trump officials themselves reportedly warned Congress about Patel. Because here is the thing about the concern over Patel's confirmation that makes it particularly significant. It is not just coming from Trump's opponents. Oversight materials indicate that people who served in the Trump administration, people who were on Trump's side, privately warned Congress that Patel will use the FBI to protect the president's allies and target his critics. When people from within Trump's own orbit are raising those concerns privately to Congress, it adds a dimension to the warning that pure partisan criticism does not have. These are not people who are opposed to Trump. They are people who worked for Trump and who apparently concluded that Patel's approach to running the FBI would cross lines that even they were not comfortable with. The nature of those private warnings, what specifically they said, what evidence or experience they were drawing on, is not fully documented in public materials. But the fact that they were made and that they were reported to Congress in the oversight process suggests that the concern about Patel is not simply a Democratic political reaction to a Trump appointee. It reflects something that people with direct knowledge of how Trump world operates were genuinely concerned about. Now, let us talk about the broader pattern that Patel's enemies list fits into. Because the 60 people in his book appendix do not exist in isolation, they are part of a much larger ecosystem of Trump-aligned targeting of perceived enemies that has operated across both terms and through multiple channels. Trump himself has been extraordinarily public about his desire for retribution against people he believes wronged him. He talked about retribution openly on the campaign trail. He retweeted and amplified content attacking specific individuals. He pressured the DOJ in his first term to investigate people he considered enemies. He fired officials who he believed were not sufficiently loyal. And the pattern that emerges across all of these episodes is of a political operation that maintains informal and sometimes formal lists of enemies in speeches, in social media posts, in books by allies like Patel, and that looks for opportunities to use the power of the federal government to act against those enemies. Patel's book is the most explicit version of that pattern because it puts names in print in a commercially published document. But it is continuous with a pattern that has been visible throughout Trump's political career. And now that pattern has a new and particularly powerful tool available to it: the FBI. The same FBI that Patel's book accused of being weaponized against Trump can now be directed by the man who wrote that accusation. The symmetry of that situation, the former critic of FBI weaponization, now running the FBI, is exactly what makes it so alarming to the people who understand what the Bureau can do when politically directed. Let us also think about what the confirmation of Patel means for the institutional independence of the FBI, because the FBI's effectiveness as a law enforcement institution depends fundamentally on the perception that it operates based on law and evidence rather than on political direction. That perception is not just a nice ideal. It is a practical requirement for the Bureau to do its job. Witnesses cooperate with FBI investigations when they believe those investigations are legitimate. Courts issue warrants when they believe the probable cause affidavits reflect genuine investigative work rather than political targeting. Foreign intelligence partners share information with the FBI when they trust that the information will be used for genuine national security purposes. All of those cooperative relationships, which are essential to the FBI's ability to do anything, depend on the Bureau maintaining credibility as an institution that is not simply a tool of whoever holds political power. When the director of the FBI has a published enemies list, that credibility is damaged regardless of whether he ever acts directly on that list. The people who need to cooperate with FBI investigations now have to calculate whether the investigation is genuine or politically motivated. Foreign partners have to calculate whether sharing intelligence with the FBI means sharing it with Trump's political operation. Courts have to evaluate whether warrant applications reflect real investigative work or political targeting. That damage to the institutional fabric of the FBI is real, and it does not require a single proven act of retaliation to begin accumulating. It begins the moment people understand that the person leading the institution has published a list of 60 enemies. The moment that becomes public knowledge, the FBI's reputation for independence takes a hit. And that hit makes it harder for the Bureau to do its job effectively, regardless of what Patel actually does with his power. Now, let us also spend a moment on what this situation means for the career professionals who work inside the FBI below the director level. Because the 60 people on Patel's published list are not the only ones affected by his confirmation. There are thousands of career FBI agents and analysts and administrators who have built their careers around the idea that the Bureau operates on law and evidence rather than political direction. These are people who chose federal law enforcement as a career precisely because it represents something they believe in. The idea that the law applies equally, regardless of political power, that investigations are driven by probable cause rather than political convenience, that the institution they work for serves the American people rather than any individual political leader. Many of those career professionals are now navigating an environment where their director has a published enemies list and has made public statements about targeting deep state actors. They are calculating every day how to do their jobs with integrity in an environment where the institutional leadership is signaling values that are in tension with the professional standards they were trained to uphold. That internal tension between professional integrity and institutional loyalty to leadership that appears to be politicizing the institution is one of the most significant and least discussed consequences of Patel's confirmation. It is a tension that will shape the behavior of the FBI from the ground up in ways that are difficult to observe from the outside, but that ultimately determine whether the Bureau operates as an institution of the rule of law or as something else. And understanding that tension and the people who are living it every day inside the FBI is essential to understanding what the Patel era actually means for American law enforcement. The career professionals inside the Bureau are not passive observers. They are making decisions every day about how to interpret their director's signals, how to maintain their professional standards, and how to serve the country in an environment where the leadership appears to have a different conception of what the FBI is for. Their choices will shape the FBI's actual behavior more than any directive from the director's office. Now, let us talk about the broader historical context that makes what is happening with Patel so significant beyond just this specific situation. The independence of federal law enforcement from political direction has been one of the most contested and most important questions in American government since the Watergate era. Nixon's attempts to use the FBI and the DOJ as political weapons against his enemies list, his pressure on the Attorney General, his firing of the special prosecutor, produced a constitutional crisis that reshaped American understanding of the boundaries of executive power over law enforcement. The post-Watergate reforms were specifically designed to build institutional protections against that kind of politicization. Independent counsels, inspector general offices, civil service protections for career law enforcement professionals, norms around the separation of the White House from law enforcement decision-making. Those reforms were imperfect. They have been tested repeatedly in the decades since. But they reflected a bipartisan consensus built from the actual experience of watching a president try to use federal law enforcement as a personal weapon. That consensus was that some separation between political loyalty and law enforcement decision-making is essential to maintaining the rule of law. Patel's confirmation is a direct challenge to that consensus, not because of any single action he has taken, but because of the pre-confirmation record he brought to the job. A published enemies list, public promises to target deep state operatives, private warnings from former Trump officials that he would use the Bureau to protect allies and target critics. All of that creates a situation where the post-Watergate protections for law enforcement independence are being tested in a new and particularly explicit way. And the outcome of that test, whether those protections hold, whether they bend, whether the FBI under Patel becomes a political instrument that the people on his list fear, is one of the most consequential institutional questions of the current moment. The real danger is the attitude, not just the list. This is the big picture takeaway, and it is the most important one. The 60 people named in Patel's book appendix are not the full scope of the risk that his confirmation creates. They are the most explicit, documented version of a much broader attitude. The attitude that the FBI should be used to protect Trump's allies and target his critics. That perceived enemies of Trump are legitimate subjects of federal law enforcement attention. And that the institutional independence of the Bureau is less important than its utility as a tool of political loyalty. That attitude does not need a formal list to operate. It can direct investigations, influence prosecutorial decisions, shape what gets pursued and what gets dropped, without ever producing a document that explicitly says, target this person because they are on the list. The most dangerous form of politicized law enforcement is the kind that does not leave a paper trail, that operates through suggestion and implication, and the shared understanding of what the director expects. And an FBI director who has published a book labeling 60 people enemies has communicated his expectations as clearly as anything that might later be said in a private meeting or a quiet phone call. That communication is what the people on the list understood when they hired lawyers and upgraded their security. And it is what every American who cares about the independence of federal law enforcement should understand about the current moment. The confirmation of Patel represents a fundamental shift in how the FBI is understood and how it is expected to operate. And that shift has consequences that extend far beyond any specific investigation or prosecution. Now, let us think about what the confirmation of Patel means for the relationship between the White House and the FBI going forward. In previous administrations, there was a norm, imperfectly observed, but generally respected, that the White House would not direct specific investigations or prosecutions, that the FBI would operate independently of political pressure, that the president would not use the Bureau as a tool to go after his personal enemies. That norm has been under pressure for years. But Patel's confirmation represents something different. It is not just a president pushing the boundaries of the norm, it is a president installing someone who has explicitly rejected the norm. The director has put his rejection of the norm in writing in a commercially published book. He has named the people he considers enemies. He has made public statements about targeting the deep state, and he has been confirmed to run the FBI with that record fully documented. The message to everyone inside and outside the Bureau is clear. The old norms about FBI independence are gone. The new norm is political loyalty, and the consequences of that shift will be felt not just by the people on the list, but by every American who expects the FBI to enforce the law impartially. And one final thought that I want to leave you with, because everything we have discussed today, the enemies list, the confirmation hearing, the protective steps taken by the named individuals, the broader institutional concerns, all of it points toward a fundamental question about what kind of country the United States is going to be. The question is not whether Kash Patel has personally directed investigations against the 60 people in his book appendix. The question is whether an American democracy can maintain the rule of law, the principle that legal accountability applies equally regardless of political power. That law enforcement investigates based on evidence rather than loyalty. That the institutions designed to hold power accountable operate independently of the power they are accountable to. The people running those institutions have explicitly and publicly identified enemies and have been given the tools to act against them. That question does not have an easy answer. It is being tested in real time, and the outcome depends not just on what Patel does with the FBI. It depends on whether Congress maintains meaningful oversight of the Bureau, whether the courts enforce the legal limits on political direction of law enforcement, whether career professionals inside the FBI maintain their professional standards under institutional pressure, and whether the American public pays enough attention to what is happening inside its own law enforcement institutions to demand accountability when those institutions are being used for purposes other than the impartial enforcement of the law. Those are the questions that the Patel enemies list story raises. And they are the questions that matter most for the kind of country that comes out the other side of this political moment. The independence of federal law enforcement is not a partisan issue. It is a fundamental pillar of democratic governance. And when that pillar is weakened, the entire structure of democratic accountability is at risk. The story of Kash Patel and the FBI is not just about one man and one list. It is about whether the American experiment in democratic governance can survive the pressures that are currently being applied to it. And the answer to that question is still being written, right now, in real time, by the choices that all of us make about what we pay attention to and what we demand from our institutions.